The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. My guest tonight is a presiding justice in the British judiciary, has decades of experience in public service across sectors and jurisdictions. She's an ambassador of the transformative power of education. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studios Chair of the Board of Governors of the University of Wolverhampton, Angela Spence. Angela, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me, Sonali.
Absolutely. Angela, the paradigm of education is shifting rapidly across the world. It's now more internationalized. But whilst traditional knowledge is seamlessly transforming and transitioning across borders and continents, there's a question as to whether values, humanity, kindness are getting lost by the wayside in spite of this progression of education. How do you view this dichotomy?
Wow, that's a great first question, Sonali. I think there's always the potential for such values to be lost, but it's critically important that people remember these are fundamental principles of humanity, and without them the world is an incredibly harsh place. I think really it's a matter of continually reminding ourselves and reminding others of these basic values, and ensuring wherever possible to live those values, because it's one thing talking about kindness, but the way you really articulate that is through action.
In your capacity as Chair of the Board of Governors at the University of Wolverhampton, what do you think are some of the most significant challenges facing universities today? And how do you think institutions can position themselves to thrive in this rapidly changing backdrop?
So anyone who's been following the news in the UK, finance is a massive issue, and the Office for Students, who are the regulatory body for universities in the UK, has shifted perspective to look at financial viability. So that is critically important, because the cost of being a student has been static for the student for a number of years now. I think the last increase was in 2017, but please don't quote me on that. And the new government has just pronounced a marginal increase. It's marginal on the profit and loss, but for students it's going to be quite significant, because it is expensive to study at university in the UK. So getting finances right, ensuring that we're delivering quality products that people want, but also doing what we're doing at Wolverhampton and have been doing for quite a while, is developing international relationships with places like Sri Lanka, where we franchise our courses. Obviously, it's critically important for us as an institution to ensure that whoever we partner with are credible partners who will help us to elevate the brand that is the University of Wolverhampton.
Angela, incidentally, the University of Wolverhampton and the Maharaja Institute of Management of the Capital Maharaja Group have collaborated with two new master's programs, one in film and television production, another in digital marketing. These signify a move towards creative arts. How important is it for us as a society to encourage students to pursue these fields?
Okay. I mean, it's a relatively new partnership, which we're really proud to be part of at the University of Wolverhampton. Actually, part of my day today was spent at the Institute, and the quality of equipment and facilities is really, really outstanding. So I think anyone who's fortunate enough to secure a place on any one of those courses will be in for a phenomenal experience. The creative arts are increasingly an area of activity that young people are interested in getting into. The opportunity to influence what goes on in the world through the creative arts, be that news reporting or fine arts and anything in between. It's critically important, and I think in a world that's increasingly ugly, it's really important to have creative arts as something that we can fall back on, something that we can experience joy through. I laugh all the time and say that I'm not very creative, but I'm a very keen amateur photographer. Mm-hmm. So I'm photographing things all the time. I mean, people that I'm with are often really anxious to move on to the next point. Mm-hmm. I've spotted something. Oh, let me take a photograph of that. But I'm also into landscape gardening, which I would never have thought of as a creative art, but I find it therapeutic, an opportunity to take myself away from the fast pace of life and just get to one with nature. Mm-hmm. So I'm going back to your question, I think phenomenally important and to be encouraged.
And since you spoke of joy, I come to my next question. You've worked in leadership for many, many years. Angela, something that people often struggle with is finding their purpose. And most people are so caught up in their daily lives that they don't sometimes have the means or the luxury to focus on finding their purpose. Mm-hmm. But for those who do strive for self-actualization but get lost, how does one go about finding joy, finding purpose, finding meaning in one's life, finding the magic?
That's a very big question. Mm-hmm. And I think a challenge for us all. But I do some work with young people, and one of the things I almost try to ingrain in them is the quickest way to being disappointed is by comparing yourself to others. I mean, social media is a minefield of artificial life versus real life. So joy and purpose, I think I love people. I actually adore people. So I get my joy from hearing people's stories, experiencing different cultures. I mean, travel is something that I'm very fortunate to be able to do both in my private life and as part of my work life. I think people should never confine themselves to my purpose is X or Y, but rather explore the things that they're passionate about, that makes them feel wonderful to be alive. Friends of mine, we have this conversation about joy. You can find joy in the smallest things, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's about being realistic and also taking a proportionate view on life. I was on a podcast at the University of Wolverhampton earlier in the year, and the debate was about happiness. What is happiness? How do you define happiness? And we had this long, meandering conversation about it. And in the end, I concluded, actually, in that space, that happiness might be the wrong thing to pursue. Being content with one's life, being content mm-hmm. with one's position, and drawing joy from the little things in life. You know, we can all bemoan things that don't go right, but actually, why don't we flip the script and look at, oh my gosh, it's a beautiful day today in Sri Lanka. I woke up this morning, opened the curtains, the sun was up. I thought, wow, how fortunate am I? So different things for different people, but I think not comparing ourselves, because it's a thing of the moment. And I think it's the quickest way to being unhappy with your life and your lot.
Absolutely. And that has a lot to do with self-worth, self-concept, self-reflection. And for most young people, finding these spaces of safety, of learning, of guidance are too few and far between. Speak to us about how the education system can harness these spaces.
Oh, wow. One of the biggest complaints I get from young people that I work with in the education sector is the lack of respect that's afforded them by the teaching staff. So there's a power imbalance, isn't there?
Right.
So we are the teachers, and therefore you must respect us. There is an argument for actually it's a mutual relationship, and actually respect must be earned rather than just assigned because of position. So education, it is my passion. Because not only does it offer a passport from one arena into the next, it also opens one's mind to all sorts of possibilities. I think, very cliched, young people are our future. Young people need to be given the space to question, to challenge, to experiment, because it's only by attempting things and often failing in those attempts that we learn, because the next time we're faced with that set of circumstances, we remember, oh yes, the last time I did that, I failed because I did X. Now, if I avoid that and implement a different strategy, I'm more likely to have a better outcome. So young people and education, I mean, they're inextricably linked, aren't they? And I think the thing in the UK, I had this conversation recently with a friend of mine. I think often when you're afforded privilege, free education, you don't always appreciate what's there. So in my travels, I've encountered young people who've walked 5-7 miles in the heat to get to school, gone into classrooms where there are no resources, but they're fluent English speakers, they can recite their times table and actually engage socially with you. So it's about, I think, recognising the value of education and working to ensure it gives you the best possible platform for adult life.
Angela, if we are to look at education from a gendered lens, we see how women are equipping themselves with education, with higher education, with PhDs, entrepreneurial skills, mental health awareness, self-care, whereas the young men are perhaps not keeping up. And we see this in the data. How do we bridge this divide?
That's a challenge, and if I had the answer to that question, I'd be a very wealthy woman. But I will make an attempt. So, I mean, the evidence is there, isn't it? So, girls and young women, and I don't want this to, create any gender wars, but girls and young women tend to be much more focused, have clearer vision on where they want to go, and therefore set themselves on a pathway that takes them to higher education, PhDs, and all the rest of it. Young men, and I work with young men also, I think the difference, young women, if I say to a group of young women, measure your self-esteem on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being, yes, everything is fantastic. If I encounter something that I hadn't planned for, I'm resilient enough to pick myself up and keep going. Young women, and I'm talking about the young women that I work with in schools, will always rate themselves at the lower end. Boys and young men, they're 9s and 10s, right? So, and you have to ask yourself, how is it that young people born in the same era, there's such a disparity in how they measure their self-esteem? But it doesn't follow through, does it? So young women who are scoring themselves low know what they need to do. Young men, on the other hand, who score themselves 9s and 10s, I'm not really sure what happens in their world that then means they're left behind. Perhaps they don't know how to ask for help and support. Perhaps they really don't have the level of confidence in themselves that they say they have. I'm the eldest of 5. I have 3 younger brothers and a sister. And we've all done relatively well. So in my upbringing, I didn't see what you've described, but I know it exists because I'm working with girls and young women, boys and young men, and there is that difference. I don't know what the answer is. I suppose asking the question might give us the answer.
I'm in conversation with Chair of the Board of Governors of the University of Wolverhampton, Angela Spence. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
Step away from the conventional art of storytelling. Get ready for the Newsfirst Breakfast Rundown with me, Zulfikar Farzan.
First in your heart, Sri Lanka's #1, the Sirasa Media Network.
Companies play better politics than the politicians of today.
We are not supposed to play with the people's expectation. Then it will be a huge disaster.
When you're bankrupt and when you're going to bankruptcy, two different.
The grandfather is saying it is going to take this long. What does he know?
It's about the lack of sense of humor in Sri Lankans.
Issues that matter the most. Unfiltered discussions. Real answers. Face to face. Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on TV1.
ජාතික මෙහෙවරින් අපි කතා බහ කරන්නේ පුරුෂ පාර්ශවයට කාන්තා පාර්ශවයට වෙනසක් නැතුව ආයුර්වේදයට අනුව ලස්සන වෙන්නේ කොහොමද කියලා.
හොඳම මොයිස්චරයිස් එක තමයි කොමඩු.
යම්කිසි වයස් මට්ටම් වලට පැමිණෙනකොට ඇතිවෙන බෝන් නොවන රෝග තත්ත්වයන් තුලදී කොයි ආකාරයෙන්ද ඇස ආරක්ෂා කරගන්නේ?
බහුලවම අන්ධභාවයට පත්වන රෝගී තත්ත්ව ගත්තොත් ඇත්තටම ලෝකේ ලංකාවේ දෙකම නම්බර් 1 ඇත්තටම තියෙන සුද ඇහි සුද.
නිරාමිෂ සිතුවිලි වලින් තමයි පිබිදෙන්නේ. ඒනට ප්‍රශ්නේ ටික වෙලාවක් යනකොට වෙනස් පැත්තකට යන්න පුළුවන්.
මූලික අරමුණ සියදිවි හානි වැළැක්වීම වුණාට ඕනම කෙනෙකුට ඕනම ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඕනම ගැටලුවක් ගැන කතා කරන්න අපිත් එක්ක යොමු වෙන්න පුළුවන්.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට
People's Platform.
Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Angela Spence. She's the chair of the Board of Governors of the University of Wolverhampton. She's also a presiding justice in the British judiciary. Angela, when we speak of the disparities in the judicial system, specifically the criminal justice system, it is so important to look at it holistically. There are so many systemic inequalities and other variables which determine sentencing of offenders, for example. How must a judge go about ensuring that the decision-making process is as equitable as possible?
You're right to identify systemic issues. I think a judge's job is to be fair. A judge's job is to use the evidence before them to make a determination. We are the recipients of quite a bit of training around ensuring that we don't bring our prejudices into the courtroom, and there's an acceptance that we've all got likes and dislikes. However, those should be left at the door, because it's grossly unfair to work on stereotypes that are likely to result in much harsher sentencing. So always evidence-based. In the UK, as I'm sure in other jurisdictions, if there is doubt, that doubt goes to the benefit of the defendant, and therefore you would acquit. And in the criminal justice system, the bar is very high, so beyond reasonable doubt or satisfied to be sure, it's quite something. So if you're not there, friends have this conversation all the time, but you're not there. So how can you be satisfied to be sure? And it's on the quality of the evidence, how that evidence is interrogated, what the responses are. It's the advocate's job to put doubt in the mind of those who are sitting in sentence. So, for example, a witness will have given a statement, and that statement now is being tested in court. If you make an error, that error can go against you, because then it's used to determine credibility, integrity, and the rest of it. So being fair, and if unsure, acquitting, because there can be nothing worse than convicting the innocent.
When we look at the plight of those who receive convictions, their lives, the trajectory of their lives is adversely affected. And this is the same for minor offenders as well. What is the responsibility of society to ensure an effective reintegration process where we don't crucify offenders after their debt is paid? How do we bring them back into society? How do we treat them as one of us?
I think it's really important to understand that once the debt is paid, that should be the end of it. We know that it isn't, because I have asked a question time and time again: when does an ex-offender stop being an ex-offender? There are businesses and organisations in the UK who work explicitly with those who have been convicted of a criminal offence and they work to reintegrate them into society. And I think we work on the basis, or we should work on the basis, that people make mistakes. None of us are perfect. I think it's important to understand that even those who commit offences and pay their debt to society should be entitled to be free of that and to be allowed to move on and get on with their lives. It's a very contentious topic because you'll have proponents on this side of the argument saying, well, they shouldn't have, and because they have, they should forever be considered offenders. And then you have those on the other side of the argument, like myself actually, who believes in rehabilitation. Everybody has the potential to be rehabilitated. I think as society, it's our duty to support those who want to be rehabilitated and reintegrated into society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In the corporate world, as in politics, impactful and sustainable public service is of paramount importance. You worked with marginalised communities through your work with Square Pegs Round Holes, which is a not-for-profit in the UK. In your experience, Angela, how is resilience built within communities, especially those facing systemic barriers?
So how is resilience built in communities? Understanding what the issues are, accepting that people within a community are not homogenous, so their experiences will be very different. Their responses to things that happen in life that they hadn't planned for will be different. Resilience is built on acknowledging in a community setting where wrongs have occurred and giving people an opportunity to air those grievances. I think without that opportunity, you build resentment, not resilience. Systematic barriers, they're all around us, aren't they? And again, it's understanding how you can get around them. Sometimes you can't move them out of the way. So you go around them, you go under them, or you go over them. But acknowledging that they are there and not to use them as an excuse, because I think there are some commentators who would say, well, you know, others who have come before you have managed to navigate these challenging waters. So why is that not a possibility for you? And so the term snowflake can often be used in this context. But I think, as I said at the start of this response, is that people are different. People have different levels of tolerance, different levels of resistance, and we have to accept that.
Angela, when we speak about the terms social change, system change, these have become such buzzwords which lack real meaning. We are looking at an America where women's bodily autonomy has been effectively, systematically taken away. We're looking at an Afghanistan where women's erasure is imminent. In such a backdrop, what do we do?
I think if we talk about the American context for a minute, so not having autonomy over your own body, I mean, just let that sit with you for a moment. The government should have no involvement in that. That is a choice and a decision made by a woman, depending on a whole host of circumstances, which we won't go into as part of this discussion. Social change, system change, you're right. Very buzzy, but what does it mean in reality? when there is true social change, there will be parity between men and women. Men will not be making the decisions, as they have done in America, in Afghanistan, about a woman's place in society. I think there is much education that needs to take place to help people who don't quite understand that there is no difference between being born a boy or born a girl. And that whatever a boy child can accomplish, so too can a girl, with the right support. Because if you are from a society where there is differential treatment because of your sex, there needs to be some programming to move that out of place and get people to understand that both are equal, both should be treated equally, both should be allowed appropriate access to opportunities. As I said previously, I'm the eldest of 5, and there was absolutely nothing that I said to my mum and dad about wanting to be that they said, oh, you can't be because you're a girl, you know. So lots of this stuff is generational, so it's not going to be remedied overnight, but the starting point is parity of esteem.
What role does the state play in making, in levelling the playing field?
The state should lead by example. That's what the state should do. I think about the UK context and the parliamentary system. The behaviours sometimes are questionable. So you have impressionable young people watching that, thinking that is the way to behave. The state has a job. The state's job is to behave appropriately and to use appropriate language, and not to vilify or bully people.
I think previous Sri Lankan parliaments take the prize over the UK Parliament. Hopefully we won't be seeing any other hooliganism in the future. You've worked across public, private, voluntary and community sectors, Angela. What common challenges do you see in bridging the gaps between sectors?
The difficulties currently is that there's a hierarchy, or whether real or perceived. So you have public and private sector probably vying for first pole position, and then you have the voluntary sector, which actually is a sector that's probably best connected to individuals, so they understand what their issues are able to raise those up. So I think respect for each other's contribution is really, really critically important, and understanding what the contributions are, because people hear the term voluntary sector and think, oh, just a bunch of do-gooders trying to do stuff, and not understanding that they're a critical component in the delivery of social good.
My final question to you, your understanding of the world and joy is multidimensional. How must we societally progress towards a more beautiful tomorrow?
Recognizing that we are all human beings, treating each other well. There's been a push towards being kind, but what does that mean? I mean, it means different things to different people. But I think where we see disparities is where people believe they're better than others. We are all members of the human race. If we treat each other respectfully, we treat each other well, we give each other space to say what's going well, what's not going well, and providing support, I think we can move towards a better tomorrow.
All right, fantastic. Angela Spence, thank you. This was lovely.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next Friday. Good night.